Hey everyone, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you're joining from. I see people joining already. Drop me a message about where you're joining from. I'm always curious to see what representation we have here. As the title of the screen implies, today we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity certifications. There will also be a segment on cloud native application protection platforms. And we're going to also have our news bites this morning. As always, with WJI, catch up a little bit on the news of the week, recent news coming out. Oh, we got a Houston. That's where I grew up. Hawaii, Dubai. So we do have some people joining from the afternoon. Cleveland, Ohio, Dallas, another Texas local. I'm chiming in from Austin, so always happy to see it. Wow, plenty of people. I love the representation. Denmark, Canada, Israel. This is all super great. I'm really looking forward today to sharing with you. So I'm glad that we have a good group of people from all over. I'm really looking forward to this today. Few different segments. We'll be back. I'll be back with you later to talk about certifications, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation going. We've got a couple of people on who have gotten certifications or who help run the program. So make sure throughout the stream, if you have any questions for me, for us, for the guests, please post. We're going to try and answer some throughout. But I'm looking forward to getting started. People are still flowing in. We got South Africa. Wow, Norwegian, Morocco. This is a great, diverse crowd. I love it. Love to see it. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to kick us off by introducing Michelle Peterson and Thomas Wolf to talk about recent news. They'll chat with you for a few minutes, get you up to speed on the latest in cybersecurity, and then I'll be back.
Hello, and welcome to Wait Just an Infosec News Bites, where we bring you expert commentary on the most significant cybersecurity news from across the globe. I'm Thomas Wolf, here in the cozy confines of my home Sans studio. This week's news is all about breaches and leaks, folks. So before we dive into this week's news bites, I have a quick pop quiz for you. Now this might seem elementary, but they can be easy to confuse. So, what's the difference between a leak and a breach? Be sure and post your answers in the comments section. And with that, let's get to the news. So, what does everyone think about a 10-year time to detect? Crazy, right? Well, in news from the automotive sector, Toyota recently disclosed that a misconfigured cloud environment exposed the vehicle location data of more than 2 million customers for nearly a decade. The misconfiguration allowed access to the database without a password. It affects Toyota and Lexus owners enrolled in Toyota's cloud service platform. The good news is, the data isn't very useful for cyber attacks. The cautionary tale of this story, however, speaks to two often overlooked weak points in cybersecurity: supply chain security and misconfigured cloud services. Toyota has provided few details, but what we do know from their statement is that they lack the visibility and detection to notice the gap. It's even possible they weren't pen testing their cloud environment, which would have likely caught the issue. These revelations are pretty shocking coming from such a huge corporation. In healthcare news, the personal information of almost 6 million Pharmerica customers was compromised in a March 2023 breach. Pharmerica provides long-term pharmacy services. A forensic investigation revealed intruders stole names, social security numbers, and health insurance and prescription data. Very little information has been provided to the public on how the compromise occurred, but odds are the initial vector involved phishing to obtain reusable passwords. Researchers point out, given Pharmerica's size as a Fortune 1000 company, it should have had sufficient resources to protect its infrastructure. And in a move that's sure to frustrate all of us in the cyber community, Pharmerica waited until the very last minute of the HIPAA 60-day rule to notify the federal government. And while Pharmerica says they don't believe the stolen data has been used to commit fraud or identity theft, if you are a customer, don't take their word for it. Make sure you have credit monitoring set up to protect yourself.
In our final breach-related story today, the popular Discord communication platform notified its users that a cybersecurity incident occurred at one of its third-party support providers. The incident compromised the personal information of users of Discord's support ticketing system. The breach data includes email addresses, customer service messages, and attachments. Discord has been in the news quite a bit lately. due to the leaking of U.S. national security data on the platform. Now, Discord has over 150 million users, and it's increasingly becoming popular as a business communications tool. So it's likely that you have colleagues that are currently using Discord. Organizations who are using Discord would do well to understand what data is being stored there. And if Discord hasn't been formally approved for use at your company, now's a good time to remind staff of the risks of using a service that was really never intended for business purposes. And those are your SANS News Bites for this week. For more critical cybersecurity news and commentary from some of the absolute sharpest minds in Infosec, don't forget to subscribe to the SANS News Bites newsletter, your twice-weekly summary and analysis of the most significant cybersecurity developments. You can do that at sans.org/newsbites. Thanks again. I'm your host for this week, Michelle Peterson. Hoping to see you next time.
Okay, and with that, let's move into the rest of our show. So I'm going to start by having a poll question thrown up on the screen for all of you to start participating with us today. So the question is, are cybersecurity certifications worth it? When we were talking about this show, we talked about, when we were planning it, we were talking about how sometimes people have a more negative view of certifications in terms of, is the value there? Is it being used too much as a criteria versus a skill set, looking at actual skills? So I'd like people to hop in. We'll keep it up for a few minutes. It'll be up while we move on to our next segment. So you have time to respond, hop in there, give your opinion. And while you're at it, I saw a couple of people in the chats posting about the certifications they have. So let's post in the chat, talk about what certifications you've done. If there's any you really thought provided you extra value, go ahead and put that in there, and we can kind of see what people are doing in terms of their training. And we'll revisit this poll later, kind of look at what everyone's opinions are. It's starting off with a strong view that they are worth it. So we'll see if that's the case here in a little bit. Until then, I'm going to let Frank Kim do a little promo snippet and talk to you about the Leadership Summit. It's a summit we have at SANS. It's coming up, and it's a great summit to join, but I'll let him take over and talk about that for a minute.
Are you a seasoned security leader working to build your security program and gain executive support? Or are you a new security manager growing and getting the most out of your team? Maybe you came from a deeply technical role or a non-security role altogether and are looking for tips, tricks, and best practices to solve your day-to-day security leadership and management challenges. If any of that sounds familiar, join us at the annual SANS Cybersecurity Leadership Summit on Thursday, May 25th to hear what's worked and what hasn't worked for industry leaders, CISOs, directors, managers, and leaders. Learn more and register for this free and online summit at www.sans.org/summits. Hope to see you there.
Okay, the link is in the chat for that summit with some details. So grab that link, go register. We hope to see you all there. The summits are always a great time. I've chaired a couple. It's great audience interaction, lots of good content. So I highly recommend joining that summit and all future SANS summits. With that, we have made it to our main segment. So the title of the stream of this episode is called Exploring the Evolution of Cybersecurity Certs. And part of the reason we wanted to name it that is because we're bringing on one of the GIAC representatives to talk to us, Brian Correia, about the new certification program that GIAC has launched a couple weeks ago, their new certification structure. And in order to supplement that, we're also bringing on Christopher Holler. Like me, he was an MSISC graduate. He's got a ton of SANS certs, but he also have done a lot of ISC2, CompTIA, all of those sorts of certs. So he's got a great view of being certified, taking those certifications. So that's great. We'll go ahead and get started. So first, can we check that Slido poll, if we'll throw that back up quick and see if the audience is still in agreement? Okay, we do have some diversity, small 5%, but I love to see differing opinions. So there are a couple people who think that it might not be worth it, that there's other ways to go about pursuing your cybersecurity education. But to start, since I am super excited about the new GSP program, I did this program myself. I beta tested it. I luckily passed. Christopher also did the GSE program. And so what I want to start with is if Brian could give us a quick intro, what has changed with the program? And then after that, me and Chris can talk about our experiences with it.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, Megan, and good morning and good afternoon for the folks out there in Europe and the Middle East. So, with the new GSC, it was actually built, and so if you know a little bit of the history of the GSC, it was built to be very difficult. It was built to be the top tier. So, in some ways, I always kind of look at it as like the Navy SEALs, the Top Gun type of group of individuals would go through the GSC. Now, the big change is we've added some more flexibility to the program. In other words, if you're always going to be a forensics expert, you can now do that. In the past, there was actually a listing of certain certifications that you had to do at one time. Now you actually have the flexibility. But what's also great is that now that we have the new applied knowledge, which are made for kind of like the top tier. So it's based on your work experience and things along those lines. You can now actually, instead of going to, say, like Las Vegas, where I used to always call it the amazing race, where you kind of took an exam there on person, you can actually now do that virtually. So the folks out there in Dubai, the ones in Hawaii can now do that virtually with those applied knowledge, those more difficult certifications. We have 3 right now that just premiered the same week as RSA. We also have 2 that are coming out later on this year. But think of them in some ways as, we have the practitioner exams. Those are made as kind of like a baseline skills validations. These are kind of built for like the top tier. Sometimes maybe, since we're talking about other certifications, think of it in some ways, which is a really good certification of the offensive security, the try harder concept.
Perfect. So we'll move on to talk about kind of me and Christopher's experience there. I'll start it off. So going into these exams, I had been told the concept. I knew that they were exams based on the other exams I taught. So you have the experienced cybersecurity specialist, which is based off of the GSEC, the SEC 401 course. You have the experienced incident handler based on the GCIH and SEC 504. And you have the GXIA based on the GCIA. So I went into these courses. I knew it was all going to be lab-based. that's part of these exams. There's no multiple choice. It's 25 cyber live questions. So if you've taken any GIAC exams where they have the VM you boot and you answer a question based on evidence on that machine or various tasks, it's like that. And I knew that. And so I was thinking it was going to be very similar to the GCIA, GCIH, and it was going to be kind of aligned with the workbooks and the textbooks, just like the other GIAC certs I had taken. And very quickly, I realized that was not the case. I took my books in. It's an open book like the other exam. I would pull up a question and flip through the books because with GIAC, I know the answers are somewhere in the book. It was not in the book. It was not helpful in the same way to have that open book because the whole point was, can you take that knowledge and apply it? So you're not following the same exact skills you learned in the course. It's not an exam based on a course. It's an exam based on your experience and skill set. And especially for things like the IH, that's not my work area. It was never a strong skill set. And so I was very quickly having to try and take the skills I learned and apply them in a completely different context. And so it was very challenging. It's not something you can study for. Like you can work the skills, you can understand the things, but applying the knowledge is much different from taking an exam that you can textbook study for. And so the other part of it that's great. And while the beta test, I took the 3 certs that are being offered. So you have to get 3 of these applied, or sorry, it will be 4 of these applied knowledge certs in future. But I did all 3 applied knowledge certs. And the great part about part of the reason they changed this program is over the coming months and years, they're going to expand the program to include, for example, a GCFA version of the exam or a GPEN version or GREM version, essentially expanding it to include all these specialties, which the point of that is the idea that you can't be an expert in every single subspecialty of cybersecurity. They want you to get that ranking of GSP, of the GIAC Security Professional, while staying in your focus area. So I can take 4 certs more aligned with forensics or 4 certs more aligned with the red teaming, which is great. So I'll let you chime in now, Christopher. Tell me a little bit about your experience, any gotchas or things that surprised you, and how you feel about the change in how this program is working.
Yeah, thanks. And, thanks for having me on the show. This has been a great experience. Really excited to chat with everyone. So, specifically my experience with the GSE is, I was pursuing it because I saw it was the elite top tier, number 1 certification. I saw it in a handout that was when I was taking my first SANS course back in 2018. And, part of me was just like, well, one day I want to get that and I got to figure out how to get there. So with the changes to, the testing capabilities that happened with COVID and being able to do those remotely now, that has significantly helped my ability to, take the SANS courses and also take the exams online. I'm coming to you from, sunny New Hampshire here. So, we don't exactly get a whole lot of SANS conferences up here. There's one in Boston once a year. So I do a lot of my stuff online from home. I love the Cyber Live questions. Those are by far my favorite because, like you were saying, it's all performance based. It's very, hands on the keyboard, actually doing things and actually, working through these questions. If you've ever done like the CCNA certification, they do have some kind of simulated questions where, it's like a fake environment where you have like half of a real Cisco router and it doesn't have all of, the commands or all of the, the tab completion or anything else. Whereas, doing these Cyber Live questions, they're full on VMs running there. You can actually run like you would be responding in a real situation or actually using them like it was a pivot system that you were actually using in an environment. That is something that really helps not only validate the skills for a candidate, but also help evaluate and say, hey, I actually know what I'm doing in one of these scenarios and can help respond or do this correct type of testing. The new GSE certifications and how those worked, having 4 hours to do 25 questions of all of those all at once, it sounds like a lot of time, but these questions, they're pretty, not exactly straightforward. They're pretty vague, kind of like if a customer came up and asked you, tell me how I was hacked, like, sure, they don't really understand exactly what they're looking for. All they know is that they were affected by something and you have to figure out what happened and unravel that kind of all of those questions. So that was something I wasn't expecting, but I also really enjoyed that perspective of, okay, there's very vague questions, but I have to figure out how to get to a very specific answer based on that information. So again, being able to work through all that, as well as kind of simulate a stressful environment or that idea of where time is a very critical factor in a response or in some kind of scenario. I was very surprised with how well that was emulated in those tests, and I learned a lot from it. It was a lot of fun, very challenging.
Yeah, and I think that was the general. I got to see some of the feedback and hear kind of what people are saying after the beta, and that was the general sentiment. Was it was a great cert. You could tell that if you passed, it was a real sense of achievement. It wasn't. I feel like there's some exams I've taken in the past, especially without hands-on,
Yep.
that are easier certs. Not to say that easy certs don't have value. Because you can get jobs with certs. So an easy cert isn't necessarily bad, but you don't have that same sense of accomplishment. There's certs I've gotten where I'm like, yeah, I got it, but a lot of people get it. And it was just a multiple choice. And I felt like I was just regurgitating a textbook. Whereas this
Yep.
exam, passing it was a real sense of achievement. And I'll tell everyone 3 of the GX. And I failed it twice. I'm totally fine admitting that because it is a challenge. I'm not gonna lie. And so especially when I got to that third retake and finally passed, the sense of achievement there, like I didn't even know coming out of it if I'd pass it. So that's a great advantage of it, because when you come out of it, you really truly feel like you've earned it, and you really you deserve the respect of passing it, that it is. So that was a really good part for me. Do you, because I'm sure a lot of people now, especially if they didn't hear about this before, opening the links in the chat, seeing what it involves, do you have any tips or recommendations for the people who are now looking at, okay, maybe I'll take this, whether it be for preparation, anything you did that you feel helped, or anything you didn't do that you wish you would have done going into the exam?
Yeah. Great question. So, I mean, just like any other exam, taking a look at the exam objectives, and what I'll do is I'll copy those, put them in a spreadsheet, and say, just quickly evaluate how comfortable I feel with each of those individual objectives. Like, all right, I like this, I like that, or like I have no idea what I'm doing with process hacker, or I really need to freshen up on PCAP analysis or something along those lines. And I'll do a quick self-evaluation going down the list, and then I'll start pulling resources for each of those individual objectives, and then try to find, like, hey, what kind of information can I do about this? Can I download like the manuals, print those out, put them in a binder, all that kind of information. So it's a lot about really looking at the objectives and kind of evaluating yourself, where you feel and how comfortable you feel at each of those.
Yeah, that's a great point. Since it is hands-on, it's not questions like, what is the definition of this term? So there's a lot of tool usage and navigating
Yes.
the machines. And so I think I took a similar approach. Is I was thinking about the tools I was potentially have to use. Was I going to have to use John the Ripper? Was I going to have to do some sort of steganography? Was I going to use Wireshark? And like you said, finding those resources. For me, I love command line cheat sheets. So, or like Wireshark cheat sheets. So what are the commands I need to run for XYZ? So take advantage of that open book. That's something I love about GIAC. They understand that as analysts, as cybersecurity engineers, incident responders, we do not have all the command line flags in our head. When we're in an incident, we're Googling it. We're looking at our cheat sheets. We're figuring that out. So they're not expecting you to regurgitate some knowledge about the functionality of the tool. They're expecting you to understand how the tool works at a basic level, and then use those resources to find the task that you need to perform. So that is definitely a great recommendation. I agree with that. So pivoting a little bit, we just talked a lot about GIAC certifications, but not everyone, especially for the GSE, there's the prerequisites. There's less of them now, but there's still prerequisites. So let's talk. I'll start with Brian. You mentioned you've worked for ISC2, so you've seen the rest of the industry in terms of, from a certification perspective. Can you just talk a little bit about the other certs? Maybe highlight some certs that you've seen of value for getting into jobs. Any paths you recommend for people. And maybe a little bit about, I did have someone in the chat ask about the CISA cert, so the auditor cert. So maybe a little bit about what about the people who aren't forensic analysts and incident responders and red teamers who aren't wanting to do these technical certs?
Yeah, so I always look at GIAC certifications. Like if we do anything better than I would say anybody else in the marketplace is prepare people for work roles, is what you had talked about, Megan. I want to become a forensics analyst. I want to become a pen tester. I want to go into different areas. Now, there's a lot of really good certifications out there in the marketplace. And it's interesting because sometimes people always think that it's one or the other, right? And they're all kind of built with a little bit of a different purpose. So when I was there at IC Squared, of course, the one they're best known for is the CISSP. So the CISSP kind of covers everything in the kitchen sink. It's kind of like a 360 view of cybersecurity. It never really goes deep into anything. So the whole, mile wide, 1 inch wide, that kind of whole philosophy that's out there. Now you have CompTIA certifications, which are typically known as kind of like the introductory foundational certs that are out there in the marketplace, probably best known for like the Security Plus. I know we had a question over here of the CISA. So the CISA is actually built as a work role certification for a security auditor. It's put together by ISACA. It's quite well known in the industry. It's very specific of its mission of that. The other big one that ISACA is known for is the CISM, which is kind of a managerial certification that's out there. The other big players that are out there is EC Console. Now they do a couple work roles. They're best known for the Certified Ethical Hacker. And then I would say Offensive Security, which is kind of a little bit of the more what I would say what we've just been talking about with the Applied Knowledge certifications, all hands on, all, in our case, it's Cyber Live. That exam was built where, hey, you're probably not going to pass it the first go around, right? When you go ahead and you take the certifications from them. One recommendation I always say, because there's also all the certifications out there from the vendors, from Microsoft, AWS, Cisco, the list goes on. Red Hat has some really good ones that are out there. There's a really good resource out there, at least I recommend. It's called pauljeremy.com. The other recommendation I always tell people to do is just go to Reddit. Like if you're looking at 2 certifications, just Google out there, because people will give you some really good advice of here's some pros and cons of each one of our certifications and kind of say, this is best for this audience, this is best for that audience. But Chris, I know, for example, you have, I think, almost like 20 certifications, I think it is. It's pretty high.
Way too many.
Huh?
It's way too many, yeah.
Too many to count. But Megan, I don't know if that gives you kind of a good idea. I'd love to hear your opinions about the different certifications out there in the marketplace. But
yeah, so I think there's kind of 2 points there that you touch on that I wanted to highlight. First is thinking about the role you want to go into. Yeah. So that we could say a lot of like, oh, this cert is widely recognized, maybe the Sec Plus, for example, very general, very widely recognized, great for getting a job like as a SOC analyst. But, I saw people in the chat talking about they want to transition to a GRC role. That's a very specific role where you're going to find very specific certs. Not to plug, but to plug, I am the co-author of SANS 4509, the Enterprise Cloud Forensics. We just launched our cert on Cloud Forensics Incident Response. And as far as I know, someone can correct me, we are the only certification focused on IR in the cloud. So that's a very niche thing, but that can highlight a specific skill set if you're looking for that specific role. So I think there's levels to it. Are you trying to just break into the industry, get a cert that will get you a position somewhere in cybersecurity? Are you trying to learn to transition or get a position in a different role? The second point I want to touch on that I kind of thought of when I was talking is we are a world in which we have money, and sometimes we have more money than other money. And so sometimes that decision can be influenced by your financial situation. Christopher was talking about how through the Navy, he was able to get some funding for his education. And so that guided a lot of the path he took with certifications. For me, my employer offered to pay for the MSISE, which is SANS's master's degree. If you don't know about that, highly recommend checking it out. And that came with a bunch of certifications. The program is doing a bunch of certifications. Whereas sometimes you don't have an employer, you don't have someone paying. Something like GIAC might be outside your price range. And one of the great things is you mentioned those vendor specific certs, Microsoft, Google. Cloud is a big focus right now. And a lot of those providers are offering free training. And then you're just paying for the cert voucher. And those are typically on the cheaper side, $200, $300, because those vendors want you to use their products. So they want you to be certified to use them. So you're more likely to use them. CompTIA, they offer a lot of lower cost certs, the ones that will get you in the industry if that's your goal potentially, and are well known. They have a lot of free training on YouTube. Professor Messer is known for his Sec Plus prep course. My brother and my friend just went through that and both passed their Sec Plus certs. So there are options. I know we're GIAC. We love our certs. I will advertise them all day. But if you're in a situation when you're like, I'm not there yet, I need to get an employer who will help me pay for that, help fund that, then there are options that you can look at it from a pricing perspective. What can you afford? What can help you take that step towards a place where you can go take SANS training and GIAC. So that's something worth looking at, something that might differentiate. But definitely agree, you need to decide what your goals are. And if you don't have goals, I know when I was coming into the industry, I didn't know what I wanted to specialize in. I was just going to start as a SOC analyst. So I got the CompTIA Net Plus. I got the Linux Plus. I got my base skill sets. I filled some knowledge gaps using those certifications. I'm a person who I like a challenge. I like a goal. And so for me, like, I won't just sit down and watch YouTube videos to learn, because my goal is learning about that topic. But if I know that there's a test to pass at the end, that's very motivating for me. So that's kind of why I've done so many certs in a way, is that's my motivation. I want to be able to prove that I really ingested that knowledge. So we're getting close to the end now. I do see a question from Ankit about the GIAC difficulty. So from that perspective, Ankit, it partially depends on the certs. So we've talked about the applied certs, and then GIAC has their original certs, the ones that have been around for years, the GSEC, the GCIH. Yep. Those are going to be based on the course material. They're considered a bit easier because it is more aligned with the course, so you can study more directly for it. Whereas the GX, the applied knowledge certs, they are a challenge. So I'm not going to lie. It's meant to challenge you. It's meant to make sure that you're not just following a textbook that you do not know. So I have another question from, go ahead. If any of you want to chime in on that.
So Megan, one thing that I would throw in there is, so our current certifications, when you really think about it, the practitioner ones, in some ways, think of them as like a baseline skills validation. So it's no different than, think of it as like a doctor when they get a doctor's license, or a lawyer, or a good example of another certification, another marketplace is a CPA. Right? Doesn't mean you're the best accountant in the world, doesn't mean you're the worst accountant in the world, but it does offer skills validation to know that you can do that job, right? These applied knowledges are built to be, hey, yes, I am the top doctor here, or a top lawyer in my field, right? Doesn't mean I'm maverick, but what it does mean is I'm that Top Gun school, right? Like, that's what it is. It means that you're in the kind of top percent, if that makes sense. So in some ways, sometimes I think it helps to kind of say it with other industries. It's just kind of like you had mentioned about getting a network plus and a security plus. Like, sometimes that's really good to do. We also have one over here called the GFACT, which is our foundational certification, with the idea of kind of learn where you want to go. But we're seeing more and more every day that this industry is going no different than any other industry, which is people become specialized. So typically you don't just become a doctor, you become an econologist, a brain surgeon, right? A pediatrician, you become something. But this way it kind of lets you kind of figure out what you want to be, right? And then kind of specialize from there. Because the truth is, I remember starting 20 years ago, people were cybersecurity professionals. Now nobody's really necessarily a cybersecurity professional. You're specialized in something, if that's fair to say.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, when I started, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I've learned a lot about what I wanted to do through taking SANS training and certs. Like there's course
Same.
material I took, and I'm like, I have absolutely no interest in this. And there's course material I took that I loved. And I was like, I want to do this as part of my job. So that really helped. There's a couple more questions. We only have a couple minutes, but I'm going to try and hit them. And if any questions aren't answered, they've been dropping our LinkedIn's there. I know I'm happy to get messages on LinkedIn and answer questions. So if I don't answer because of time, so sorry, hit me up. Ryan asks, if you don't have the funds to gain on a certification, but have done self-learning, would a company be more interested in you even without the certification because training shows that you at least took the knowledge?
Yeah.
I'm going to say I don't necessarily agree with it. I think over the coming years, we're going to see companies look more at practical skills than a resume. But at this time, I think companies are still in that mindset. We've moved from, I'd say, 5 to 10 years ago, it was you need a bachelor's degree to get in here.
Yeah.
Everyone needs a college degree. If you don't have a college degree, you're not qualified. Finally, companies are realizing that college degrees, as someone with several degrees, they're not super valuable from the practical side. So companies are realizing that, but now they are more heavily relying on certs. You'll see on job postings, we prefer you have one of XYZ certs. So I'd say currently, whether you agree with it or not, their companies do use that to wean out candidates, but do the training even if you can't do the cert, because you will find the companies that will just test your knowledge. And if you have the knowledge, it's better than, oh, I didn't do the training. And a lot of the cybersecurity certification training is to help prepare you for those skills. There's also AJ talking about transitioning from working in telecommunications to cyber, and any advice for looking for a position, what certs are going to be desired. I do typically recommend the Sec Plus first because of the pricing, because of the broad knowledge it gives you to start out in security, and because many job postings will highlight that as an option. I don't know, Chris or Brian, if you have any other recommendations, but that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Yeah, Sec Plus is definitely, that great baseline, like you were saying.
Yep.
And, when I'm doing certs, I'm not just doing it, for my resume. I'm also doing it for a personal kind of perspective as well, where I want to learn more.
Sure.
And I want to learn, how to do that specific thing as well. And, it's nice that I get to do a test and put it on my resume at the end. But I'm just so in love with the chance to learn more about how to do that particular thing in depth and then add it to, the rest of my skills and tool sets.
So one thing that's interesting about certifications, there's actually a science that backs this all up of the retention of when you're actually being tested on something and how your brain actually learns it and actually keeps that in long term versus when you just take training. Like if you take training, there's science that says that typically you would retain anywhere from like 10 to 40%, while a certification will allow you to be, if you pass it, more like around the 70, 80, even higher percentage. We actually on our blog actually have a whole thing about different articles that kind of back that all up. And it maybe seems like it's common sense of, yep, if I'm going to be tested, I'm going to retain it. But it does actually force everybody, including myself, to actually learn that material better and kind of pay attention. And, I'll admit, even I have a little bit ADD, right? And it allows me to make sure when I sit in that class, I'm a little bit more focused. So that's sometimes a nice advantage of, certifications for the individual versus the organization. For the organization, the nice benefits is it kind of gives a skill standards of that security team, right? And kind of backs that all up. But, certification, think of it as no different as other industries, right?
Okay, with that, we have ran out of time for this segment. AJ, Oscar and Kit, Sharaf, I know I missed some questions there. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I want to make sure I get all of the questions hit. But it is now time to move on to our final segment, where we're going to have Dave Shackleford with his guests, Anna Black and Knox Anderson, talk about cloud native application protection platforms. So enjoy that segment, and I'll be back to close you out in just a minute.
Hey, everybody. My name is Dave Shackleford from the SANS Institute. Super excited to be here with you all. And I am very pleased to be joined by Anna Bellick and Knox Anderson, who are both experts in the industry, focused specifically on cloud security across a number of different areas. So welcome, Anna. Welcome, Knox. Glad to have you with me.
Pleasure to be here.
And so what we're going to be talking about here today is what we're going to be focusing really specifically around some of the changes that have happened, not only in the threat landscape around cloud, but also what people are doing about it. What kinds of technologies, what kinds of controls people are putting into place in order to effectively combat these threats and improve the overall security posture of the cloud. So I'm going to kick it off, and I'm going to throw this to either one of you, whoever wants to answer first. But the question is a general one, but I think an important one, maybe to help everyone understand what's changing out there with regard to the threat landscape in terms of attackers targeting cloud assets and workloads. Obviously with the move to cloud, the attackers haven't been idle. So what are you seeing out there? What's changing? What are some of the big trends that you've observed?
That is perhaps the $1 million question of the whole industry, I guess. So I think a lot has changed in the past couple of years, actually. So if you asked this question last year, most of the answers you get were, oh, everything's getting crypto mined, crypto miners. That's still true. And crypto miners are kind of expensive. As it turns out, we did some research showing that it costs like $53 to you every time a cryptojacker wants to make $1. Which can be a pretty bad AWS bill in the end. But what's happening now is we are seeing much more interesting activity, like folks not just automating miners, but actually seeing some advanced persistent threat activities and leveraging specifically cloud native technology for evil, right? So they are scanning things in AWS in a way that an AWS expert would do. They're not just randomly scanning the internet, like Shodan style. They're actually looking for specific things, mostly as credentials, and then they're able to leverage those credentials to pivot to other assets within your environment to create new assets. And sometimes they use that for mining, but other times they're actually starting to steal data and exfiltrate proprietary information and so on. So it's getting pretty interesting.
Knox, any thoughts on that
one? I think the crypto mining thing that Anna had talked about is definitely true. One of the other interesting things that we're seeing is there's more and more companies that are offering SaaS services, free tiers, those things like that. So a lot of fraud use cases you're seeing as well. This is something I hear from cloud providers. It's something I hear from ISV clients. So people are offering some type of compute, and then that could be used for crypto mining, that could be used for running a DDoS. So how you secure your free tier or whatever you offer as a vendor is also something that I'm seeing come up more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. The attackers are getting pretty good at cloud too, it sounds like. So of course, the natural shift here is, what are we doing about it? So one of the things we hear at SANS consistently from folks that come in and take classes and participate in our research is they really struggle with cloud visibility. They feel like they just don't have proper visibility into configuration state, into the nature of workloads. Obviously, there's a lot of ephemeral assets in the cloud, much more so than there used to be on premises. Things are coming up, going down, changing all the time. So give me a sense, what are organizations doing to try to combat this? What kinds of controls are they putting into place, or do they need to be putting into place to effectively see what's going on and track all of this in these highly dynamic environments?
Yeah, and I think it's requiring much more of a multi-layered approach than what you did before. I think everyone's all probably heard, like, you used to have a firewall, you can't do that anymore. And so I think there's different layers of visibility that you can get. So starting at the highest, working with your cloud control plane. And so using data sources like CloudTrail, using native cloud sources like GuardDuty are a good place to start, because you want to understand what's managing your different resources, who's making changes, and the different threats that could be happening there. And then you kind of go down in different layers. So you definitely need to get that workload visibility. One of the biggest changes between on-prem and cloud is on-prem, you used to have one server, it was mapped to some team, you had a CMDB somewhere that lets you track all of that. That really doesn't exist in the cloud. And so you really need something that understands the application, which multiple services could be running on some type of compute resource and how it's all connected. So understanding that inventory and then getting real-time visibility is also really important, because no one's controlling what's running on these servers anymore. It's Kubernetes, it's ECS, it's Fargate, it's a ton of different services that you're using to empower developers. So getting that deep workload visibility is definitely more of a requirement than what you had before.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just going to add a little bit of a comment that I always like to harp on, and it's that things are really fast in cloud, and they're also typically quite short-lived. I think we have a data point in our report that says that 72% of containers live less than 5 minutes, and a lot of the workloads in cloud are containers, right? So you can no longer really take these, I'm going to say old school, don't throw things at me, approaches of like scanning every hour or scanning every 30 days or what have you, because something could come up and do something terrible, come down, and you never see it, right? So you both need a resolution, like second-to-second resolution of what's happening, and you need a way to then do forensic analysis on things that have effectively just disappeared, maybe without a trace. And like we have done these things in the past, but now it's just a different scale and a different approach. And so we are hoping that you have a fun time adapting to that. There are tools out there, but it's still very much an emerging field.
Hey, so you mean we can't track everything by IP addresses anymore? Oh, come on.
We could try.
Right.
You're going to have a bad time.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So last question for both of you. You know, I think that logically, again, kind of leads us to, okay, we obviously need maybe some new controls. We need to tap into some more of the cloud native capabilities and those guardrails that are running in the background. But how does this change cloud detection and response? You know, what does this mean for SOC teams and the security operations folks that are so used to being able to go track down those assets in old school ways, right? I kind of like that. You know, what are they having to do differently in order to be able to adapt this way?
Yeah, one of the first approaches to detection was just like, I'm going to collect all my data, put it somewhere in my SIEM, and then do detection against that. Because there's so many assets, because so many things are changing, if you tried to do that, you would just run out of money. You couldn't operate as a company. It's going to be way too expensive. And so you need to do more detection at the edge. You need to do streaming detection. You need to do more pre-filtering before things go to the SIEM. So that's I'd say one area on detection. And then on the response side, kind of, you can't go in and check out that server. Like, you don't have access to the data center. So you need to be, let's say, more proactive in the playbooks that you run to either snapshot a container, take a capture from something like Sysdig, one of our open source tools, or do some SOAR actions, but do things like committing a container, or just taking, collecting that artifact evidence ahead of time, because it's going to be gone by the time someone can actually go in and respond to the incident.
I'm going to go a little different way, actually. And now, like, I feel bad for offending the SOC people just a second ago. So I'm going to go with empathy for the SOC people. It's not your fault, guys. It's going to be okay. So detection and response typically does live in SOC, right? Security Operations Center. And I think one key nuance here is that in the SOC, typically we're dealing with kind of stuff that somebody else built. Like, we have operating systems, we have like routers, we have all these things that we're watching. And when you go to cloud, we shift much more to stuff that we have built ourselves. So you have all these custom applications that your internal teams have created, and someone just like plopped a Kubernetes cluster into your data set, and you're like, what is all that? Like, I don't know. So we're always yelling at developers to become more security conscious. I think we actually have to go to SOC and reach that olive branch the other way and say, like, look, you have to help your security team understand what this thing is supposed to be doing so that they can get some visibility into what it's not supposed to be doing. So I guess we're back to the whole like DevSecOps kumbaya story, but you know, at the end, security is a human problem. So here we are.
Yeah. I think that's actually a fair point, right? Everybody needs to be working together on these things. Like, what is normal in the cloud, and how would security ever even know that? So I think that's important to point that out. So, hey, well, that takes up our time for today. I just want to say thank you so much to Anna and Knox for joining me. And thanks everybody for joining us today here as well. See you all next time.
Thank you.
Building your certification portfolio is a way to prove your depth and breadth of knowledge. Brand new to GIAC is the GIAC Security Professional, otherwise known as the GSP.
The GSP is a new certification that we're introducing that is essentially the halfway point to the GSE. And there, instead of having 6 and 4, you need half of that. So 3 regular certifications and 2 of these applied knowledge certifications.
So from my personal experience, I felt that the journey allowed me to hone various points of my education and actual experience through the SANS curriculum and tie back into what I actually need to do from a day-to-day basis.
Candidates can build their certification portfolio over any amount of time as long as the number of required certifications within your portfolio remain active.
Building your certification portfolio is a way to prove your depth and breadth of knowledge. The GIAC Security Expert is the most prestigious credential in the IT security industry.
The GSE is the GIAC Security Expert. That is a certification that has been around for over 15 years at this point. Okay? It is recognized as being among the broadest and deepest cybersecurity certifications by various third parties.
Yes, so the GSE is like the pinnacle of security certifications that shows that somebody has offensive and defensive skills, but not just knowledge, but hands-on practical skills that you can put into work. So it's like an elite team of people that have mastered either a lot of broad knowledge in the industry or that have very specialized deep knowledge in certain areas.
Candidates can build their certification portfolio over any amount of time as long as the number of required certifications within your portfolio remain active.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. That's all we have for this episode. I really enjoyed the discussion, and I hope you guys did too. I hope you take away some value. Throughout the show, we've been dropping links in the chat, so check out the various webcasts, certification details, the summit. Connect with us on LinkedIn. We're happy to talk. I am at least always happy to get messages from people, answer any questions I can, or point you to better resources. And next episode of WJAI is actually going to be kind of supplemental to this. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity degrees. And so that should be a great one. Definitely recommend tuning in if you are available. And also these videos are always available after the stream to watch back. So if you want to watch any of this again, definitely join. And with that, I'm going to close out the show, and I hope to see you all in future.